Two Wood for a Wheat is a board game podcast. We review and criticize board games, diving deep into the strategies and mechanisms that make them great or make them forgettable.
Welcome to Two Wood for a Wheat.
My name is Patrick Flannery.
I'm Tony Faber.
Today we're going to be discussing the new hotness, Earth, a huge game of 400 cards that is riddled with growth and planting and sprouts and strategy.
And we're also going to be taking a look at other games with big, giant decks of cards.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good, and I'm excited to talk about Earth, our featured game that we're reviewing this week.
As a resident Earthling, I feel like I have one or two things to say on the subject.
And I'm also excited about our feature topic, big decks, the pros and cons of having a huge, unique deck of cards in your driving your game.
Well, before we do, should we talk about recent plays, Tony?
Sure. What have you been up to?
I've got a lot. I had a lot of plays. You would be very jealous, Tony. I got a play in of Darwin's Journey.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
Yep, told you. This is a new game by a few of the Italian designers, including the acclaimed and Tony's favorite Simone Luciani, as well as Nestore Mangone. This is a heavy Euro with everything in it. It has Maracaibo-style exploration. It has worker placement. It has worker upgrade spots. It has a pattern fitting for your workers in order to even go to a spot. It has Barrage style end of round scoring. It's got everything, Tony. It's a big brawling game, and it is a ton of fun. Probably my favorite part of it is these wax seals. Basically, you have 4 workers, and in order to take worker placement spots, you need to match the workers' seals. These wax seals that they kind of specialize in, and they come in a few different colors, and you need them in order to even use the worker placement spots. And it creates this tremendous strain on using a single worker with that single row of seals. And you want to use it for what it's best at. Like I might have a worker with 4 different seals, 2 of which are blue, and those allow me to move my ship forward along the Galapagos, right, to the next island and explore there. But I really need this one action that is at the bottom of the special action board that also needs 2 blue and the green that also happens to be with that worker. And I need that in order to score this round, right? So I'm like, I really want to take the exploration action because that's what it's good at. But instead, I'm going to have to use it for this other action. And none of my other workers are specialized in that thing, so it's one or the other, right? And so it creates this tremendous strain on using a single worker. They happen to make your actions more powerful, which is really cool. If you get, I believe it's 5 and then 7 wax seals along a single worker, that worker can be specialized to silver and gold levels. And it will take like 1 extra action, or it will be, 1 extra power. For instance, if you're buying wax seals at a silver level, you'll be able to buy a second wax seal. And at a gold level, you'll be able to buy that second wax seal at a discount, right? So extremely powerful actions. And then you've got these stamps, which are almost like income that you have to bet on. And then you've got Maracaibo-style exploration, which is tied to points and abilities and endgame bonuses. And then there's this constant tension, just like in Maracaibo, this constant tension of where you actually want to stop. Yeah, I really want that 5 coins right there because money is tight, versus where you have to stop in order to get the points. Because again, this game is about Darwin's journey through the Galapagos. You have to discover specimens on the islands and research them through actually exploring. And then you have to send them over to the museum. Over the course of a game, you're playing into this theory of evolution grid, which is a 4x4 grid of different specimens. And this is a really cool mechanism. Basically, whenever you place a museum specimen into this 4x4 grid, you will get coins for every empty space in the row and column that you place it. But then for every filled space in that row and column, you will advance up this theory of evolution track, which is kind of like your scientific progress and prowess. And that is so much of the points during the game. It's basically every filled row plus 2 multiplied by how far along you are in that track. So it ends up being like some huge amount, like a third to half of your points. And it also creates this like natural evolution throughout the game of, I'm going to use this to get coins versus at the end of the game, I'm going to use this to get my points. This is where my points are going to come from. So amazing mechanisms in this game. Another one that I love is you actually build out worker placement spots. And when you build them out, you have to put these lenses out. And the first time that you build out a worker placement spot, you get to take that action instantly, even if you don't have the wax seals. And you'll have to have the wax seals to use it later on. But that first time you can use it for this early bonus, which gives you a huge advantage early on in the game and tie that to the superpowers that come from completing objectives. And oh my God, there's a lot in this game.
Before you finish up on your thoughts on Darwin's Journey, whose copy are you playing? Because I know you didn't back the game.
Brian's, of course.
Oh, of course. I
Yeah.
forgot you've got Kickstarter Maestro.
Yes, the man of the man. He has all the best Kickstarters and all the most deluxified with the metal coins. And if you want to have a good time, you go over to Brian's because he knows how to teach, he knows how to host, and he knows how to get a good game going. So, one big caveat: played a rule incorrectly so that the theory of evolution track was easier to get into. It meant that the guy who had done the least as far as a wax seal puzzle and as far as the special objectives that could be player powers, and he did about equally as well as far as exploration and these other aspects, he won via the theory of evolution track. Now, the thing is, this is not unusual. I have read elsewhere that this theory of evolution track is usually like a third to half of your points. So in some sense, at least during our game, it felt like it devalued the other mechanisms. But I feel like that's probably mitigated to some extent by the fact that we got that rule wrong. But I am concerned about that. Then again, there's so much variability in this game. There's so many different special actions that are in the box. There's so many different special player powers and objectives that you can go through. The game has a huge variety to it. And like, for instance, we had a space that let us reactivate a specimen, thus allowing us to have a huge impact on the theory of evolution track, getting us more climbs than we would have otherwise. So, every game is going to be different. It feels like a game system more than a game. I am really excited to play more Darwin's Journey in the future.
Well, I'm very jealous, Pat. I mean, my copy is supposed to have been here a couple days ago, and it keeps getting pushed back one day in the shipping notice. So I feel robbed that you're enjoying this before me, especially since you made none of the monetary sacrifices to do so.
Nor did I wait the 2 extra years or whatever it was in order to receive it.
Exactly. So we'll get there, and it sounds like I can actually talk you into reviewing this thing at some point, which is
Absolutely.
actually makes me happy.
100%.
And by the way, the notion of perhaps one part of a big Euro game being perhaps too many of the points involved in endgame scoring might be a theme we return to in our feature review, at least in my opinion. But we'll get there. I have not played anything nearly as grandiose. Besides Earth and my usual mindless forays into It's a Wonderful World, I've been playing some Splendor and Azul on Board Game Arena just to sort of remember those games, and because they're super easy implementations, and try to remember if I actually like these games or not. Newsflash, I'm not really very good at these games, or at least I would have to get back into them to become good at them. But it's really interesting to play Splendor, which I'm used to playing with like my mother, and playing with somebody who's rated 500 on Board Game Arena.
And
It's a somewhat different experience.
I imagine it would be, yes. A bit meaner, maybe?
Well, it's interesting. At the lower levels of Splendor, everybody just does their own thing until somebody wins. Then as you get a little better, there's some serious hate drafting among intermediate players. Intermediate players love to just hate draft everything, whereas the really good players actually don't do that much. They actually consider the opportunity cost of hate drafting and only hate draft once in a while when it really makes a difference. So I've played enough with all three groups now to kind of get a sense how your strategy and thinking shifts. Not yet enough to get good at it, but I feel like I'm sort of know what I'm doing at an advanced level in Splendor, but not really. And then Azul, I kind of forgot how the game scored, which makes it hard to do well, but I'm interested in diving deeper into Azul and some of the meanness of it at 2 players and seeing if I like it or not. So more on that to come.
Very cool. Well, back in my camp, I got to play another new game. This is Legacy of You, the new game by Shem Phillips and illustrated by his brother, Sam Phillips. Legacy of You is about a famous Chinese engineer who designed various anti-flooding techniques and irrigation techniques to stop the regular floods on the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. So historically, he is a real person. In this game, you are designing canals and building out canals using what you would familiarize yourself with in normal Shem Phillips games. You have various multicolored workers, and you have worker placement spots, and you have resources that you can gather. Now, what is cool about this game is, of course, that Legacy of You is a solo legacy game. So what you are doing in this game, you have your river where you can build out canals, and chasing the boat that is building out the canals on the river is the flood. If the flood ever catches up to you, you will lose. You also have a series of characters. You start with 9 character cards, your townsfolk who are at the top of the board, and you can get them and put them into your discard pile. And once you reshuffle, you will gather up that discard pile and into your hand and draw from it, while also advancing the flood marker. Now, on the other side of things, you also have barbarians, and barbarians are attacking your village. You can bribe them with resources like wood or with a worker, or if you don't, then they will kill one or more of your villagers, and you will actually have to draw from your draw deck and permanently discard that card forever. Destroy that card is what they call it. So if you ever run out of character cards, you also lose, right? Also, as you go along, the more canals that you build, the more barbarians are going to come out every round, right? And so, if you ever have a full set of barbarians at the top of your character selection board, then you will also lose, right? And so as you build out more and more canals, more and more barbarians are going to be out there that you have to deal with. So, sounds like you're going to lose this game, right? But you have some mitigation factors. Whenever you use a character card, you can use them to tuck under spots under your board for permanent income in the future. You can unlock more of those by building buildings. Some buildings that you build out will allow those spaces and give you spots that you can put down your characters that will give you an instant income and also give you back your workers at the end of the turn for the next round. Some of them will allow you to use workers as if they were different colors. So you could use a black worker as a white worker, or if you unlock 2 of the buildings, then you could use a black worker as a red worker and also as a white worker. So they end up being equal. And then another one that gives you extra income. The thing is you only have so many building spots, and the building spots are unlocked by the canal being built. But as you unlock the canal and build it out, you are also making more barbarian cards come out at the end of each round. So you see that this game becomes a game of patience and plodding along, making sure that your engine is built out sufficiently so that you can deal with the challenges that come, right? So that you can bribe the barbarians, so that you can get rid of them, so that you have enough resources to build the canals, while also having enough resources to build out and expand further your village so that you can deal with the even harder challenges as you go along. So you can rush, as I did in the first game, and absolutely lose and absolutely get crushed because you just have this onslaught of barbarians. Each who require 3 workers that you just can't deal with. Or you can be really patient and make sure that you build things out, but not too patient because then the flood will catch up with you and extinguish your game, right? So it's a really fine needlepoint threading of a game. I find it excellent. If you do win a game, I know you were worried about this, Tony, the game will get harder and it will add more challenges. It's like one more challenge, it'll be like a harder barbarian, or maybe the barbarians are coming out of a fortress now, mild spoiler, and you will have to deal with not just the barbarians, but also the fort, right? So, but also if you lose, okay, maybe you have to deal with barbarians in an easier way than you would otherwise, right? So these small benefits and challenges that augment the system and also move the story along. I think Legacy of You is an excellent game. I've got 2.5 plays in now. I had a game going and I got distracted by it to the point where I had to halt recording a little bit so that I could get a little bit more of that game. And I'm really excited to play more Legacy of You.
So you mentioned my concern about scaling with winning or losing, and you being punished for winning and rewarded for losing. Is you don't think that's a thing so far?
It absolutely is a thing. It does punish you for winning, and it does reward you for losing. However, they are granular additions, granular challenges, and granular benefits that only slightly augment the game and add one more specific challenge to deal with that is definitive, that is realizable, that doesn't scale the entire game difficulty. It just augments the system a little bit, and you can deal with it in a very, delineated box.
You're saying it seems pretty minor.
It's minor, right?
Okay.
They add up, of course. If you keep winning, you're going to have more challenges to deal with. But as you deal with them, they're dealt with. If you destroy the fortress is destroyed.
I'm just afraid and I picture in this sort of thing where somebody says online, what you really need to do to win a tough campaign is try to lose the first 3 scenarios to get some bonuses and then win from there.
Well,
or some others. Such nonsense.
You'll get 1 of 7 bonuses. So there's not and they're randomly drawn. So it's not like, I selected the 3 best bonuses and here I am. No, you got them randomly dealt out from 1 of 7, right? So you could lose and then you have, still 7 more games that you have to win after that, right? Yeah, you might have benefited yourself, but it's not firm which benefit you're going to attain.
Okay, I'll drop my nitpicks based on no personal information.
That sounds good. So I played some more Calico with Tina. Calico is a game that was one of our favorites, a cat quilt tile laying game, a pure pleasure. I hadn't played this in a while, but after playing it 35 times a couple of years ago, it just feels like a layer of my brain at this point, and I got right back into it. And I do know that there is a Calico app coming out where you can pet the cat, you can customize the cat will lay on your quilt. You can even change the facial shape of the cat. You can make it longer. I'm hoping that you can like mod this cat out so that its tail is twice the length and width of the rest of its body. That would be fun. So I hope that there's some new challenges, and maybe that'll bring me into the Calico app coming out soon. So Tony, I got to play the new hotness, Revive. Revive, revive, revive. Bring your civilization out from 5,000 years in the future.
Also with Brian?
No, this was just a solo game, and then
solo play. Okay.
and then I got to play it at Pilsen Board Game Night. So I got 2 brief plays of it. I'll say only a couple of things about Revive. This is a race game. You're coming out of onto the frozen lands of the Earth and taking back the frozen lands and rebuilding civilization. And you're racing to building sites. You're racing to these alien skulls, which are point multipliers at the end of the game. You're racing up the score track to get the bonuses first, including more skulls, because the skulls are the end game trigger, and they're also the point multiplier. You basically get X plus 1 ability to score a given criteria for each that color skull that you get. And the funnest thing about this game is, it's a race. So at the midpoint, everybody's like, man, this game seems like a long game. Somebody even says, yeah, we'll probably be playing this until like 9 o'clock. This was at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And then 1 minute later, everybody's got a skull and the game is over. And everybody's like, what happened? It's got this really funny like ramp up into the mid game, and the mid game it just like falls off a cliff and the game is over. So it's this wonderful moment at the end where everybody's like, oh my god, I had 3 different plans, but now I just have to with one action decide what I'm going to do. So there's lots of choice in this game, lots of mechanisms, and the flexibility to use them whenever you want, however you want. You can basically interrupt your turn to use these special machines in order to get a bonus and take the bonuses in whatever order you'd like. It's pretty sandboxy. And there's these goal cards that some people are complaining about, but they're the things that interact with the skulls for a given scoring criteria, and they kind of railroad you. They're a lot of your score. But because the game's very open-y and sandboxy, these gold cards, you kind of need the railroading in order to help you play. So good first impressions so far. I'm excited to play more Revive and to review it.
Yeah, between that and Darwin's Journey, we've got some real Euro-y goodness coming up.
We do.
I did have one other game that I played live, which is finally got to get Tenpenny Parks to the table, which is a polyomino game, came out last year.
Yeah.
Which you may hear reviewed on this channel at some point. And Tenpenny Parks is a relatively light polyomino game of making your own theme parks, and you do it with very simple worker placement actions, spending money as a resource to put them on your own personal polyomino board, and you have to maneuver them around trees. And there's this nice restriction, unusual to polyomino games, where you can't put one attraction directly orthogonally adjacent to another attraction, so it's sort of counterintuitive, and at least at first you find yourself making mistakes based on that. And then you can take actions to expand your park or remove the trees that are in your way or start building up income to get more money. And when you get the parks, you move up on these tracks of like thrill and awe and one other thing. Joy, I think, is the third one. And they give you endgame points and bonuses if you're ahead on that track at the end of the round, like first player for the next round, or maybe an extra worker, or maybe some extra money. And it's a nice little puzzle. It's definitely not a super deep game with all sorts of expansive options, and my concern might be that it might play fairly similarly from play to play down the road, but it has some of those counterintuitive elements, and the choices about it's not just road about whether you get income or go for the big thing or the small thing first. It's while you might want to get attractions which give you money early, there are some tricky little decisions, especially because they involve around the placement. Like the best attractions that give you the most stuff take up the most space. And maybe you want to get one of those down early, but then it's going to be hard to put another attraction down for a while because you've taken up most of the space on your board with that attraction. So again, some nice little decisions and a really nice production as well.
Yeah.
It's got a little spinning thing in the middle where you pick up the attractions. All the attractions look really cool. The cards look cool. Your player boards look really neat. Really well-produced game. If I was to say at this point what this is kind of perfect for, it's like a family level or lightweight polyomino game where you don't have to think too hard, but there's still something to it and it looks nice on the table. It's kind of in that vein.
Have you started hitting about the same score each game?
Well, I just played it once, so.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's my main concern with that game and why I'm hesitant to review it at this point, because every time I play it, I get between 55 and 60 points.
Well, I only got like 50 points in my first game, so
Get good.
but
Get good,
that
bro.
that's my first game. Maybe 55 and 6. So maybe again that may feed into that theme of it plays fairly similarly each
Yeah,
time,
exactly.
but I haven't played it enough to really reach that conclusion. So we'll see more about Tenpenny Parks.
Good. One more for me. Gloomhaven, Jaws of a Lion. I played it with some new folks last night who are Magic and board game aficionados, but I hadn't played Gloomhaven. So it's actually a pretty good teach if you remove items and experience and adjustments to the attack modifier deck, then and you run all the admin, then it's not that bad of a teach because you just kind of teach them how to move, how to attack, and here's some basic symbols that modify things. So we gave the new folks the hatchet and the Red Guard, who of course have the strongest damage output as well as as we learned, the highest initiative. And Tina and I had the Demolitionist and the Human Void Warden. And it was hilarious because Jordan and Elena, our two guests, just rushed into the fray, beat the ever living crap out of everything, had high initiative, and jumped ahead of us and actually sprinted ahead of us before we could even catch up to them, and got to the end of the scenario. And Jordan just got the garbage beat out of him when he jumped into a door and learned that he shouldn't go into a door unprepared and nearly died. But Elena, his partner, caught up and saved him, and they were just wailing out 7 or 8 damage a turn. And it was really hilarious to see them get that glee and enjoyment from flipping that modifier deck while I was taking, initiative 58 turns and moving 2 at a time through black muck and not able to catch up to them and being like, wait, if you hold on, I'll heal you, or I see you're poisoned, hold on, I'll give you a movement, and them just rushing ahead. And I got to do literally 0 in that match, and Tina got to hit, I think, 1 guy while they decimated the other 7 to 8 monsters in that scenario. I'm glad they had a lot of fun, and frankly, playing through this and shuffling through it, it's reinvigorated me to get back into Frosthaven. I think I'm going to give another scenario go today with Frosthaven. So having fun with the Gloomhaven system.
Very cool. Yes, it can be simple.
Well, speaking of simple games, simple strategies, and simple pleasure and joy, Tony, should we get into Earth?
I'm not sure simple is exactly the word I would use for Earth, but it's nuanced. So yeah, let's get into it.
Cool.
Earth, which, caveat warning, I think both of us played pretty much exclusively on Board Game Arena.
Correct.
Now, that's nothing wrong with that. It plays perfectly well on Board Game Arena, but it's one of this new line of games that is releasing new on Board Game Arena as well as print. It was a Kickstarter that delivered, and as it delivered, it actually came out on Board Game Arena, and it's great to see more and more games do that. So Earth is a tableau building card game for 1 to 4 players, designed by Maxime Tardif, and this is his first major design. He's done a couple smaller games, I believe, and it's from Inside Up Games, a small publisher, and this is by far and away for both the designer and the publisher the biggest thing they've done. And right out of the gate, I'm going to say it, this is a tableau building game inspired by Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition, and Ark Nova. It's in the tradition of tableau building games where you get a whole big deck of cards and then all kinds of cards in your hand, and then you decide which of them, you make tough choices between them about which of them you're going to build, which strategy in developing your planet you're going to pursue. In Ark Nova, it's a zoo, and in Terraforming Mars, obviously, it's Mars. Here, you're actually seeding the Earth with terrain and fauna, although, spoiler, it's not a particularly thematic game, even compared to those other designs. So what happens is you start with a handful of cards and you make some decisions about 3 cards you start with, which will give you some special abilities, including how many cards that you actually start with in your hand. You'll start with fewer cards if you take a more powerful special ability, and more if you take a lesser special ability. Also, besides the 3 cards that modify things for you, there will be 6 cards out on the table that give some in-game scoring goals. 4 of them are sort of race goals where more points will be accrued to the person who fulfills those goals first, like build 2 columns of cards. We'll get to columns in a moment. And 2 of the scoring will just give you X number of points for doing X number of things. So that you have to assess those 6 communal scoring cards in deciding which of the 3 cards you're going to start with in your tableau that modifies things. This sounds complicated, and it is a bit. It's a bit front-loaded in your decision-making, but once you get rolling, you'll have a handful of cards, and on your turn, you'll take one of several actions. And in doing so, you're going to be building a 4x4, at most, tableau of cards in a grid. And yes, there are some reasons I say 4x4 because sometimes the spatial arrangements of the cards as you put them in your tableau matters. But the actions that you can take are you can plant cards from your hand into your 4x4 tableau. And if you call the plant action, you can plant two of your cards and you need to spend soil to do them. And the more powerful a card is, the more soil it's likely to cost to do so. Now, this game also takes from Race from the Galaxy and probably more directly from Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, the follow action, which means each player gets simultaneously a lesser version of the action that you choose. So, for instance, if you called the plant action to plant two cards, I can now plant one card of my own. So, besides the plant action, there's also the compost action. And the compost action will give you a bunch of soil, and soil is the currency to spend cards. And it'll also give you the opportunity to compost or destroy a couple of cards in your hand. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, composted cards are each worth 1 point at the end of the game, and it may also make you eligible for other bonuses with those things, depending on those 6 starting cards that are out as well. Other players will get a lesser amount of soil back. Another thing you can do is take the water action, which adds sprouts to your plant cards, and sprouts are worth victory points at the end of the game, and also gives you a little bit of soil to take the water action. You can also take a grow action, which gives you more cards and allows your plants to actually grow their branches. And that gives points, even an escalating amount of points, perhaps more than the sprouts. But each card has a different amount of spots for sprouts and a different amount that it can grow and a different amount of victory points it gets for doing those things. And so the cards that you play out, many of them are these plants that I mentioned that have a certain amount of spots for sprouts and growing. And they're also just worth a certain amount of victory points elsewhere. And they also have special abilities which add to those things that we mentioned. So a card might have a special ability that says when the grow action is taken, you get to do one extra growth step, right? Or so they enhance one of the 4 actions. So your actions get more and more powerful during the game as you build your engine of cards up there that support them. And sometimes you have to pay to take those actions. Like I might have to compost one of my cards to get 2 growth or something like that. Additionally, besides the plant cards, there's 2 other types of cards. There are these brown terrain cards, which add terrain. And terrain cards basically are scoring cards. Some might just give a lot of points, but most of them give conditional endgame points depending on doing something, collecting a certain type of card. There are different types of plants, maybe laying cards in a certain configuration. They're just endgame scoring point cards that all do different things. And finally, there are event cards. And event cards are these one-shot cards that maybe give you some resource, or you give up one resource to get another resource, and they might actually cost you a point or 2 at the end of the game. And you can play them anytime. They don't have a cost. You just pop them out and you get that thing. Although there is a cost to playing the events for the events, beyond that they might cost you a point or 2, in that they could be a card that you compost for something as well, since every card tends to have a value therein, right? Over the course of the game, you play until somebody has filled up their entire 4x4 grid, and then you finish so each person gets equal turns. Then you wrap it up and you score for a lot of things. You score for the value of all the cards that you put out in your tableau. You score for those 6 end game scoring cards that started out communally in the center of the board. You score for you had a card yourself that gave end game scoring as well of the one of the 3 cards you started with. You score for all those conditional brown terrain cards, which are also end game scoring cards, and you score for the sprouts that you've put on your plants, the growth that you've done with your plants, and you score for the compost pile for all the cards that you've mulched, destroyed along the way. And most points wins. Anything key that I've missed in the rules?
The deck is really big.
The deck is really big.
I think
and
it's
we'll
400 cards. So I'm trying to think of, this game has a big fanfare around it. All of the Dice Tower, it was like one of their highest average ratings ever. And obviously there's a lot of excitement and appeal around this game. I believe that it was on the top 1 hotness spots for multiple weeks on Board Game Geek. So what is appealing about this game? Is it the 400 card deck? I don't think so. I mean, the deck is really big, right? And ostensibly this should provide variety. But for me, all the yellow, blue, and red cards, all of the flora cards feel pretty samey to me. It's just a symboled card with a couple of different tags on it. It has an inherent flora value, be it plant or bush or mushroom or tree, and then different levels of growth or compost or sprouting ability, and maybe some different points and different capacities for growth and sprouts, right? But that's kind of it. They don't do an incredible amount across each other as far as the flora. So, what is it about this game? And I think it's not about the individual cards so much as it is the engine creation itself. Creating
By
a
the way, I
tableau
would
that
say there
satisfies
is.
the abilities of another action, or creating a card combo that will take one system in the game and slam it into another.
I do want to push back on this a little bit. I don't think there's a lot of difference thematically. You've seen one card, you've seen them all, because mostly they're just variations on how many points they're worth, how much they cost, how many sprouts you can put there, and how much you can grow them and how much the growth is worth. But inside those things, the cards do very different things. So it's not like there isn't tactical variety in what you're choosing
No,
from.
there is. I don't know if it's worth
It's
400. You know, if to see a yellow card that utilizes eats one sprout to make 2 growth versus another yellow card that is worth a different amount of points, costs a different amount of soil, and it eats, 2 sprouts to make 4 growth. Okay, the differences are not exciting to me. Are they important as far as the gameplay? Yes, they are. And will you have to make decisions, tactical decisions between them? Yes. But the reason that I bring this up is to set up another point, which is as far as the brown cards and the salient differences between them, which I'll get into in a bit. But first I want to touch on engine creation. Okay, so my last solo game of Earth, I created a tableau that had yellow cards, and these yellow cards provided extra growth. Yellow action is growth, whatever. But they also grew sprouts, and they actually generated more soil than the soil action. I had 2 different cards that generated 3 soil each. And the growth and sprout cards, they're sort of boring to me unless they're empowered like this, unless they kind of replace another action in the game. And I'll usually take those actions in the game like once or twice for the entirety of the game if they're not the focus of my tableau. But you can create these actions that kind of replace the action of another action by generating your tableau in that way. And you can even create these kind of time-wise sequencing reading order engines, because the tableau reads left to right, top to bottom in reading order. You could run like a red action engine that generates sprouts and then uses sprouts for growth, and then uses sprouts and growth to turn into soil, right? And so suddenly you've got an engine that's greater than the sum of its parts. And those moments in the game are really satisfying if you can pull them off.
Yeah, if you can pull them off is the thing. I agree. One of the cool parts of this game is the multiple paths and abilities you can focus on, whether it's growing your sprouts and soils or mulching stuff or drawing more cards or putting down those earth cards, those terrain cards to score points. There's different ways to go. But, of course, you're at the mercy of the card draw and what you come up with. You
Right.
may say, I want to do a strategy where I draw lots of cards this game, and you may not see a single card that lets you draw extra cards in the game.
Correct.
So it's really, when you can pull it off is dependent on the card routes. And it's definitely a game, like many of these games, where it's like, if the game gives you lemons, you better make lemonade, because you're not you can't be attached to a strategy. You've got to kind of run with what your cards give you.
Yeah.
And this is where, and Pat and I have debated this offline, this is where I have the biggest problem with the game. By the way, before I get into this, I should say I actually like this game more than I thought I would.
Yay.
We'll get more into our
Ha.
thoughts on this.
It got
so
you.
This is not a condemnation of the game, but there is a huge amount of the game scoring is on these end game scoring cards. Whether it's the 6 cards that start out there, the 1 card that you start with, or all the brown cards you put out with. I looked at the stats on Board Game Arena, and end game scoring cards amount to over half of the winner's points in these games. So they're really critical, right? And the card draw engine that you draw may or may not sync with all those goals, right?
Correct.
While I do feel there is definitely skill in this game, I also feel that there's not just a lot of luck with the card draw, but there's a huge amount of luck with what you're drawing syncs with those goals. Because if you're drawing something that where all your cards move you towards those goals and you get those points first, and I maybe can't get them at all because maybe there's a goal to get, cards that have X particular type,
Yeah.
and I'm not drawing cards of X particular type, right? Well, then we may be both equally efficient at doing our different engines, but you're going to win because you're going to get a lot more in-game points because there's such a large portion of the game.
Right.
And I think you have to be okay with that.
You do.
Is what I'm saying.
You have to be okay with a lot about this game as far as the luck. Let's stick to card draw for a bit.
Yeah.
Card draw is pretty much everything. I mean, at the very start of the game, you select a card that says you're able to select to draw and keep this many cards. And generally, I think the person who is able to draw more cards is going to win. that game because they're going to have a better sense of synergies that come from their initial hand, and they're going to be able to utilize powers more quickly based off of those synergies.
Yeah, yeah. Ostensibly, the different cards you can choose from trade off a better starting power for fewer cards, but it seems like, yeah, more cards is often the right choice. And while we're talking about this, the cards are not balanced.
No.
Like some cards are just flat better than other cards,
Well, I think some strategies are just better. I mean, okay. The game ends and triggers with 16 cards. What helps you plant cards? Soil. What action gives you soil? Red action. So a red action tableau is pretty much all powerful since there's so much emphasis on playing cards. Red action gets you soil, soil allows you to plant cards, the game ends triggers by cards, and early all scoring is somehow based on cards. So one game I drew 12 cards to start, and 8 out of 12 were red. So I knew what I was doing that game, and building this engine that got me soil, which allowed me to place cards, while also interacting with other parts of the game, was very powerful. And that game, I scored about 270 rushing a red engine, which is about 30% higher than the median winning score. And meanwhile, my opponent scored about half that since I rushed the engine and was able to rush the mid-game gold cards.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I played with a couple of our listeners where I just drew a perfect red engine and drew every card for the goals right out of the gate, and it was like perfect. I haven't had that much luck in our games, but in this game, I just drew everything perfectly, and I scored something like 50 points more than the other two of them put together.
Yep, exactly.
I could have told you that it was going to be a rout a quarter of the way into the game, and if I wasn't testing it and we were almost playing at the table, I might have just said, you two want to concede?
Yeah.
Because literally halfway through the game, I had fulfilled, of the 4 race goal cards, I had fulfilled all of them, and neither of them had fulfilled any.
Right. I had the same experience. I was actually fulfilling multiple goals on the same turn, which felt great, but it kind of sucked, and I didn't really earn it either.
Those victory point scoring cards in the middle, there's not an opportunity cost to them. Like if you're doing growth of your sprouts, you have to take an action to grow your sprouts, right? Whereas if you're just doing things that get you points anyway, like placing cards out, and that just happens to fulfill the goal, then you're getting 2 for 1, right? You're not making a sacrifice to fulfill those goals. It's fitting with what you've already drawn, or else it doesn't.
Happily, this is kind of an outsider situation. I maybe it'll happen in like 10% of your games. 90% of the time, you're probably going to have to build something that is, a yellow engine or a blue engine or some combination of different action engines or a reading order engine. And that's when the game gets interesting, right?
What I find fun, especially in the 2-player version of this game, and actually I think this is one of the game's real strengths, is in one sense, it pays to lean into an engine of a particular color.
Yeah.
Because then you can keep calling that action and overemphasize it, right? But you might max out on what that engine does. You might not need any more soil. You know what I mean? You may have grown all your sprouts if you're using a water blue engine, right?
Don't use it too early, right?
It can get maxed out that way. Also, this is the real fun part. If you're paying attention to what your opponent's doing, you can just keep calling actions that maybe aren't fantastic for you, but do nothing for them.
Right.
So I was playing this game with John where he just didn't have any red cards out there at all, right? So I just kept calling the red action over and over again, right? And I would get all kinds of things, and he would get nothing.
Right, yeah.
He'd get 2 soil. I would be getting like
5.
11 soil. I'm composting 4 cards. I'm growing 3 things, and you're getting 2 soil. Now, I could have gotten just as much stuff doing other actions, but it was noticing that because his engine was weak in that, the follow action thing, and it's really well done in the game by both, and I think both on the tabletop and BGA versions, where you can look at somebody's grid at a glance and see what they're focused on, because the colors of what engine is being boosted, like red, yellow, blue, is right there on the cards, and you can see at a glance what they're good at, right?
Yeah.
So you can say, oh, you've got no yellow. I'm calling the yellow action.
And you can also see that they're going after certain goals. Yeah, the player interaction, it is nominally there. You can see what they're going after, how close they are to fulfilling a mid-game objective. And, it might affect your action. You might say, oh, John has 1 away from filling his diagonals, and filling both diagonals means he'll get that 15 points. And so I'm 2 away, so I better take the plant action right now so that I can plant 2 cards so that we can both get the top level of that scoring card. And, if it doesn't work out, okay, it's only a marginal difference of about 2 points. He'll get 15 points and I'll get 13 points for fulfilling that second. It's not a big deal, but over the course of the game, that can add up.
I have two other things I want to mention that I don't like about the heavy emphasis on end-game scoring besides the randomness of it. And one is it means that, as I mentioned in my description of the game, there's a lot of front-loaded decisions you have to make and a lot of cards that you have to look at a lot of small text on. I mean, this is the nature of the beast for this kind of Ark Nova Terraforming Mars game, is that you're going to have to check the small text on a lot of cards, right? Which is one reason I tend not to lean into these games. I don't like that much minutia and fine print, right? But it's particularly strong if you have six communal endgame cards plus your own plus four other brown cards. I find every turn I'm reading, and it's in small print,
Yeah.
all those 11 cards to see if what I'm doing is enhancing those 11 conditions.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't
And
like having to reference 7 different cards to make every decision.
you're right, and more than 7 often. And the print is small, and sometimes it's tricky as to exactly what the condition is. They're not always the simplest thing, so you've got to kind of parse it. And if you're not careful, it's easy to make mistakes.
Right. And this is especially exacerbated if you're playing a lot of async games on BGA, in which case you have, 4 games. That
You're
means
confusing one game with
yeah,
another.
You've got 28 cards to reference as far as scoring, right? That's a lot.
And I can only imagine if I was playing this game at the table, because I can blow cards up with a click on Board Game Arena.
Sure.
But if I had to pick up all 7 cards off the table and squint at them, I think my opponents would lose their mind.
Right. I find myself often not really paying attention to the end game communal scoring cards until all of the objectives, mid-game objectives, have been scored, because then I only have 3 cards to pay attention to instead of the total 7. So, and then sometimes I find what I'm doing, instead of doing all that, I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to look at all that crap. I sometimes just find a Keystone brown card that anchors my whole strategy. And this is a fun way to create attention for yourself. A brown card that will give you a point for every soil you have left over at the end of the game. Okay, well, I'm going to plant a bunch of soil cards. Am I finding a lot of soil generating cards? No. Well, I guess I'm mass OL. But, if you have another card that says get a bunch of water in an orthogonal line chain, that is a lot of fun. And you get these little personal goals that you come up with, and you feel like you have the creativity to decide, yeah, you know what, I've got a water chain going, I could keep that going, and suddenly you're snaking your entire 16 card tableau to maximize the length of this chain. And those are, for me, the most fun of the entire game, these brown cards and setting these personal objectives for yourself. They're nice.
They are fun, but again, there's a lot of luck in the draw and getting them
Definitely.
and getting them at the right time.
Definitely. But if you can work towards them and get them early enough, then you can really, while you already have set aside some of the conditions, they can be a lot of fun. They're kind of a bulwark against these, I find them stupider public goals. Sometimes they'll even align with a public goal or even with each other. Sometimes they'll encourage you to put out these cards in these chunks. The spatial planning is really fun. If you've got a huge diversity of cards to choose from, you can find synergies and really maximize those tensions to enact a really good plan. Oh, you have to chain a bunch of sun symbols together, and you also get 2 points for every sun symbol on one player's tableau. Okay, well, I know what I'm doing, right? I like playing brown cards so much, in fact, that I will sometimes exclude the stupider mid-game objectives, oh yeah, have 4 cards with colors in their name. No, I'm not going to pursue that. I'm going to do the fun thing instead. And, this is reflected in my BGA stats, where I see that I get twice as many points on average from brown cards than the median player. And to the game's credit, it does allow you the flexibility to make your own point engine with brown cards instead of pursuing the public goals.
Yeah. One other thing about those, though, don't misread those brown cards or the communal endgame cards.
Oh, no. What happened?
I had this really fun game with John last night. I wasn't getting any cards that I really wanted to put out. I put out some stuff to meet some goals, but then I really wasn't getting great card draws. And in fact, it was funny because I had a ton of soil and I couldn't get any of the brown endgame cards really, that were any good.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't have the soil action, so I was just leveraging all the red actions into composting cards, right? Drawing more cards and composting them.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't actually planting anything. I was just destroying cards. And partially I was doing this because there was one of the communal cards said score X number of points for cards that you compost. But I failed to read where it said max 24, right? Whereas there's a certain amount of cards or points that you can max doing this, right?
Yep.
And I was like, this is 2 for 1, basically. So I composted 50 cards and should have ended the game 3 turns earlier, but thought I was getting double benefits for doing this. But I had long since ceased to get extra points for composting my cards.
Oh, no.
So I lost by a couple of points. And I'm like, wait, I have about 20 points less than I had. And then I'm like, oh, max 24.
Yep.
Right.
Would not want to play this in person, frankly.
So yeah, read your
Yeah.
cards carefully.
You know what is another good thing about the big deck?
Yep.
And that not all of these games do, like Wingspan doesn't do this, and that's a
Hmm.
big issue. I rarely found that I needed to search for the right card from the deck because two of the four main actions do card draw, and so there's inherently a lot of card churn. It felt like whatever goal I needed to satisfy was like on the third or fourth or fifth card that I drew, and then I usually had something that in my hand that approximately fit one or more of the goals. So there was no need for me to like actively search the deck for the most part. So much of the deck churn is just inherent to actions. I think that's friendly to a player to allow for that deck churn instead of making them search for the deck. And of course, if you build a card draw engine, you're only going to have more deck churn and be able to play those probabilities better. There are probabilities featured on the cards, on the goals, and on the brown cards. But they rarely help me decide which action to take. It was more like, okay, they're a road sign for how difficult a public goal would be to achieve, and they would dictate whether I would go after it or toss it. And like, if it was this a goal is on under 30% of cards, okay, forget about it. That goal's on the back burner. I'm not going to worry about it.
And there are things that can just cards that can come out of nowhere. Sometimes with the card churn you get just what you need, and other times you don't.
Right.
And it's just kind of like that. And I want to, and sometimes you just get that card out of nowhere. Like I think one of the things that also helped John win is he pulled one of the cards which just let him mulch like 20 cards at once in the last round.
Wow, that's huge. And he just
You
had a
know what I
bunch of
mean?
cards in his hand. Yeah.
He
You
had
usually end with 10 to 12 cards on
Yeah,
average.
he had like
so.
15 cards in his hand, right? And then on the last turn, I noticed he'd had mulched 15 more, which were counting double because of that objective,
Wow.
right? And he'd suddenly mulched like all 15 cards. I go back and forth because I think it's both frustrating and cool. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
did it happen to you or did it happen for the other player, right?
well, exactly. That's what will tell you whether it's frustrating
Right.
or cool, whether you got the cool card that did the cool thing
Right.
or whether your opponent did,
Because
right?
to your point, the best player may not win. They may just get lucky. And given the deck size and marginal difference on goals, like no loss feels that huge or terrible. And, given the huge deck, it's easy to pick up the game and go again. Feel like you might
By
get
the way,
lucky this time.
I do like the events we haven't mentioned. You didn't think they were all that important, but
Yeah, I didn't use
I
them that
like
often.
I lean into and often play the events, and you can use them to get a little edge. And they're kind of a thing you don't see in this kind of game. So I think they're a cool thing because they have trade offs.
Yeah,
And you
it can
can
be
always
like
mulch them
a
if you don't use them.
Yeah, it can be like a volcano, and it will be a staggering transition from one portion of the game system to another portions of the game system. So it'll be like a volcano, and it'll say destroy 10 sprouts, gain 15 soil, right? And
Yeah.
that's a huge damage to your engine, but it unlocks this huge ability to put out cards, right?
Yeah, so there are some cool choices with those events that I like them. But coming back to this thing about the randomness, I both like the cool combo nature and pieces of the game, but I kind of feel like the game with this kind of game should be a shorter game, so it's a sort of shuffle up thing like Race for the Galaxy and you can play again, or it should have a little more control because this is not it's a fairly long high randomness game, which is kind of what rubs me the wrong way about that combination, right? I actually looked and this is in counter to what the Dice Tower was saying, where they were saying this is actually a really fast to play game. And to me, squinting at all those cards, it ain't. I looked, and the great thing about BGA is you can see what the average game length is, and it's 47 minutes, which sounds like not that long, right? Except that's less than half of what it takes live.
Right.
To give
live
to give a
shuffle and live to
yeah, to
glance
give
at
a
everything. I
comparison,
imagine an hour and a half.
to give a comparison on Board Game Arena, the average Race for the Galaxy game is 6 minutes. The average A Feast for Odin game is 57 minutes as opposed to 47. So think 80% of the length of A Feast for Odin. I think it's 90 to 120 minutes. I mean, sure, it may be faster at 2 with experienced players, but all the player count will change everything.
Yeah.
But it's a full length, at least 90-minute game, I think, at 3 players.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Happily, like everybody takes actions in concert. Of course, if you're taking the actions, you get a slightly more efficient version of that. Like you'll play 2 cards on a red action, or you'll play 2 cards on a plan action instead of 1 if you're taking the action. So I think those games with higher player counts are a little bit longer, but it's marginal. I will say the solo game, it's only 25 minutes, and it works on BGA, and it works pretty well. It does not feel that much different than multiplayer. There's a dummy player that takes every other action, and it's good for the solo game, but bad for the multiplayer as far as them not feeling that different. Yeah, I think that it is a strange game as far as you kind of want to be able to pick it up and play again. But to your point, it is a longer game than what would allow for that to take place.
Finally, the emphasis on all the endgame scoring. This is not a criticism I usually make, but makes this a less thematic game than, say, Terraforming Mars or Ark Nova, where you really get the sense of settling a planet or building a zoo. In this game, you don't really, to my mind, get the feeling of like populating an Earth. You get the feeling of fulfilling abstract objectives, because a lot of those endgame cards are like, be the first person to build cards in a crisscross pattern, right? There's nothing thematic about that.
And that will
Or,
be a red fox will represent that card. Do red foxes like to go in
right.
a diagonal? Is that why that is?
Get 8 cards with a color and the title.
Right. And why am I putting my ginkgo leaf next to, the arid desert? Do those really synergize? No.
Well,
Will it get marginally more points if I put them next to, somewhere where ginkgo leaf is supposed to be? I don't know. Like it doesn't necessarily synchronize. Also, why are the fauna, like there's only like 2 fauna to every like 16 plants? What's that about?
yeah, they missed a trick in sort of the thematic nature of having animals there, which seem obvious, and they didn't really put them in. Mechanically, I wish there was more to the spatial element to it, because the spatial element's cool in choosing how to lay your cards out, but it only occasionally matters. Most of the time, you can just throw your cards down in any configuration, and then you hit one that says, oh, everything in this row gets a sprout, right? I better
Yeah.
make sure there's a lot of sprouts in this row. Or, oh, all these cards have to be connected, right? But I wish there was more of that. And I wish thematically there was more emphasis on the scoring on sprouts and canopy growth, on growing your plants, since that's, I guess, thematically what you're doing the most. And they're really, it's just, you think it's going to be this huge thing, and it's just one little sidetrack for
Yeah,
scoring.
you're probably not going to do that much with them again, unless your engine specifically is built off of those actions and play into the other portions of the game, such as soil, which is going to actually allow you to put out cards onto your
Yeah,
tableau.
exactly. Sprouts and growth are some nice extra points, but they ain't going to win over the person who's done all the goals.
Nope, nope,
They
nope,
just
nope.
ain't.
They sure are not. Yeah, and again, to that point, the spatial bit, that's my favorite part. If you get that spatial keystone card that you can play into and, synergize with that brown card, then you're going to have a good time. I agree. I wish there was more special stuff. So for me, Earth, it is a pretty baggy, tensionless game that has some fun in the pursuit of goals and some clever emergent card placement and some clever emergent card combos. I think at its best, Earth allows you to combo a set of card abilities that effectively replace one or more actions in the game while also satisfying a beneficial spatial placement of brown and plant cards to a synergy with one another and with the gold cards. And then at its worst, you're just putting out stuff that's in front of you that you can afford and are building something kind of okay anyways.
I said it earlier on that I like this game more than I should, almost, is because despite all the criticisms I've leveled at it, which I stand behind, I had a fair amount of fun playing this game. I don't think it's a great game, but it's one of these games where if somebody said they wanted to play it on BJ, I'd be like, sure, let's have some fun for the wackiness of Earth, which I
Yeah.
feel it's a bit of a wacky game.
One of the best things I can say is that the game is never bad. The floor is not that low. And then sometimes it's great when you're able to build something clever. And at those moments, the peaks are really high. So that average is pretty high altogether.
And a lot of the flaws that I've criticized this game for are flaws I think that are common to games of this ilk, like Terraforming Mars and Ark Nova, like the huge amount of card draw luck, and that there's a lot of randomness for the game length. So, to be honest with you, I would play this game maybe over any of those games. Now, so, if you love those kind of games, if you love Ark Nova, you love Terraforming Mars, you should definitely play this game and you'll probably love it, right?
Blasphemy.
And I like this game a little bit more than those games, and I think I like it a little bit more because even though I think it's too long for the randomness, it's still probably a little bit shorter than those games. Ark Nova and Terraforming Mars are can be 3-hour games, right?
And this one knows what it is. It tries to be exactly that.
Yeah, it's not pretending that it isn't just a big grab some cards and hope you get the thing kind of game. It is, and if you love that game with huge tableaus and random cards and pull off some wacky combos out of what you draw, make that lemonade, then you're really gonna like this game.
And that's Earth. Just a big deck of cards.
So, games with big decks.
There's a lot of these that we've been playing lately. Earth, Ark Nova, Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition. I think even some Race for the Galaxy base Race for the Galaxy is only 109 cards, so I don't think it counts. But some of the expansion arcs are have 103 cards added to that, so it's 212 cards, and I think that qualifies as a big deck. Yeah, we've been playing with a lot of big decks of cards.
It's a Wonderful World is clearly a big deck game as well. It's clearly
Right.
in that same category.
Right. So why would you have a big deck, Tony? I think the main thing is like you get lots of variety, right?
You
Like,
just, that's it. We can go home. That's the point.
right.
You get, it doesn't play the same from play to play.
Well, listen to this. You
You
never,
sacrifice fairness for variety.
and you'll never have the same deck of cards twice, right?
Yeah.
So I see why people only want 400 card decks because, one 52 card deck, it just doesn't provide enough variety. I mean, the randomly shuffled 52 card deck, I mean, the odds of having the same deck twice they're really low. It's 8 times 10 to the 67th power, a trillion, trillion, trillion. I think you really need a 400 card deck where it's 6.4 times 10 to the 880th power. That's where the real variety comes in.
That's why that was the big hit of Keystone, right? The collectible card game
Yeah.
where no deck was the same and everything was different, right?
Right.
People love that theme. And by the way, this isn't even just in these tableau building games like Ark Nova and Earth and Terraforming Mars,
Right.
or these card drafting games, or these games like card games like Race for the Galaxy or It's a Wonderful World. In the world of Magic,
Oh, yeah.
the variety deck format has taken over. The big popular format now is the Commander format. I don't know how much you know about this.
Only a little.
But standard formats of deck construction in Magic are you construct a 60 card deck and you can have up to 4 copies of the same card. Well, in Commander, you're playing a 100 card deck and there's no cards repeated. None of your cards are repeated.
Jesus.
So instead of having like maybe 20 unique cards in a regular deck, you're having 100 in Commander. And there's this divide between like the serious players, and who are building for tournaments like their constructed decks, while the casual players love Commander because of the variety. And it's really taken off as a format, and people love playing Commander.
You get that dopamine hit if I just put down this one card and the next card just happened to synergize with it, the one that I just drew, and I'll be able to play with them, and I feel really clever. Did you earn that? Not necessarily. Did it feel good? Yeah, felt great.
And a lot of Magic players prioritize, and I think a lot of game players, I shouldn't say this about Magic, a lot of game players prioritize having that one wonderful, interesting experience where something wacky happened, than, increasing their win percentage. And they're not wrong. You know what I mean? It's like that's totally legitimate, right?
I'm more of a guy where an effective big deck has to have caveats to it, has to have divisions to it, has to have some opportunity cost to it, or some literal cost to it. So to me, an effective big deck, it either needs to be very well balanced or very redundant, or the game needs many mechanisms to mitigate the randomness, such as lots of deck churn or alternative strategies to the deck or deck divisions.
For me, it's about the game length.
Okay.
The longer the big deck game, the more I lose patience with the randomness. If I realize in the first 5 minutes that I'm going to win or I'm going to lose, that's fine in a 15-minute game, right? I don't like that feeling in a 3-hour game where in the first 5 minutes I realize I'm probably going to win or I'm probably going to lose, right? So, and I'm exaggerating by saying that always happens in the first 5 minutes, right? But it can. So a game like It's a Wonderful World is a big deck game, and I prefer it to its small deck equivalent, which is Seven Wonders, as a card drafting, tableau building game, right? And there's big debates between people who like It's a Wonderful World and people who like Seven Wonders, and they violently say one game is better than the other. And it's really, do you like the small controlled deck and where deck cards come out in each ages and it's really fair? You know what I mean? Or do you like that big, wacky, random thing? Right. And when I play It's a Wonderful World, I played a ton and I'm good at the game, but I still lose to novices now and again just because of card draw. And I have to, that's what I have to be okay with. But it doesn't feel as rote to me as Seven Wonders does, where it's like, oh, yep, there's that thing. I need to take that thing right now. And actually, I have to say, I've played It's a Wonderful World like 700 times. So even the big deck is starting to feel a little rote to me, right? But still, you get into more wacky situations than I would in Seven Wonders, right?
Yeah.
So shorter game, I like the wackiness. Longer game, I'm less tolerant. That's pretty much how I come down.
Yeah, for me, it's 3 main issues that all come up as far as card draw. The first one is looking for the useful card, and the second one related to that is not enough deck churn. And then the third one related to that is relating that card and tags or attributes to a specific goal. And then the fourth one is the power gradient and how finding, the right or perfect or great card early can just totally throw a power gradient out of whack in a power build. So that first one, Race for the Galaxy, base game, It's only 109 cards. It has some effective strategies that are often tailored to finding one or two types of cards from this 109 card deck. Usually, you might be looking for, if you're building a blue strategy, you're probably hoping for that level 6 development that has blue and gives you points for every blue world that you have and allows you to sell blue cards. But then this is totally exploded when you double the card count, 212 from the expansion and Brinksmanship expansions, and you can barely find a card type that you want, let alone a specific card. It's just too big to know what you're doing, right? So that's why I don't play with all three of those expansions at once. You just can't find anything, right? And they even had to add a card mechanism into the game where it says, okay, this deck is so big, you can spend this point in order to look for a specific type of card from the deck. And just, do one time, you can just do a big deck turn. That's fine. Or speaking of deck turn, my second concern around big decks is in the case of Wingspan, the deck is just too big. The deck draw is not inherent to the actions that you take, and the goals are too specific, right? So it means that it is this unsatisfying balance that can leave someone with the best card draw luck doing the best, and everybody else to have to devise a card draw strategy in order to mitigate the luck of the deck and in order to satisfy those goals that are out on the board.
It's weird. My issue with Wingspan, and I obviously like it a lot more than you do, as long-term listeners will know, isn't the card draw luck, because that's baked into that system, right? It just is there. And there are definitely some ways that turn the cards quite a bit in that game. It's that the wacky combos aren't as exciting or as subtle in Wingspan to me. They're just like, oh yeah, you put out that card that makes eggs and food. Oh yeah, I guess you're going to put that card out.
Oh, you got the good card.
You got that great row, and you're just going to keep pushing out the eggs and buying more cards and pushing out the eggs. Now, I'm exaggerating, and I like Wingspan, although I don't love it. Yeah, the joys of putting things together to me aren't as cool as some of those other games are.
Right, and that's that power grading issue that I was talking about. It's possible to get in Wingspan a couple of cards or one good card that's really good really early. And a good designer will not just leave it up to probability to make these cards hard to play. It's not just like, it's hard to get this card because it's one out of a 400 card deck. No, let's do something else. Let's also make them hard to achieve. So, Race for the Galaxy, yellow cards are amazing. They're usually high points and can generate a yellow good, and you can sell that yellow good for 5 cards base value, which is a ton of churn that you can create. But they often cost over half of your hand to play out. So you have to have good card generation or good military or discounts to yellow in order to play them. Ark Nova, you might a personal conservation card that allows you to release a large Australian animal for 5 conservation points. That is amazing. Only you can play it, and it's equivalent to about 1/6 of a winning score if you play it at its max value. But inherent to that, you need to use an expensive, fully empowered build action to lay down the pen, and then an expensive Australian animal that you have to buy and put out before you can then use this fully empowered association action to score that conservation goal. It's something to build to. You don't just get the points automatically, right?
I'm with you. For me, again, it comes down to, with Wingspan, the highs not being as high, and also it just is that the ratio, again, it's a fairly lengthy game for the amount of luck in it for me.
Right.
We should mention one thing that often goes hand in hand with this. It's not just small deck and large deck. It's control or less control, you might say, in certain instances. And one way designers exhibit control over their deck, regardless of the card size, is to put the cards into different stages or ages that come out at certain points. So in Seven Wonders, you got the Age 1 cards, the Age 2 cards, and the Age 3 cards. And it's a wonderful world. You just throw them all in together. And you get some of the in-game cards at the beginning, and you get some of the engine-building cards later on, right? And that, which way do you go with that? It's the same thing with Blood Rage, right? You get this, the advantage of putting them in there is you get this nice arc, this nice buildup of Age 1, Age 2, Age 3, and you get the fairness of that as well, and you get the sort of the flow that you pictured when you designed the game, but you make it more predictable, and you throw out some of the zany variety when you do that, right?
Same with Underwater Cities. You get cards that get more powerful every age, but are never so powerful in the first age as to be game-breaking. And then at the third age, near the end of the game, well, you only have 3 rounds to play it out, right? So you have fewer rounds, and so, they're more powerful, but there's more of an opportunity cost to get them out. So there's a balance within a balance there.
It's weird. I like the zaniness in the short game, but I like ages in my long games. A lot of the long games that I like that are tableau builders, they all have put in that age system, like Underwater Cities. Another great example is Lorenzo Il Magnifico, which has cards in 3 particular ages and has a very tight card pool. Now, if that was only a tableau building game, it feel a little constricted or a little predictable after a while. But it's also combined with some really tight worker placement decisions about the tableau building. So it's not doesn't have the tableau building dominate the entire game, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with Blood Rage. The draft for card pool is just a supplement to this area control fight on the map, right? So you can, if constricting the card pool doesn't leave the game feeling stale if there's large other parts of the game in there as well, I find.
Right. Yeah, another one that does it well, and probably one of the most creative versions of this, is Maracaibo, which does deck diversity in this really clever way. It has this base deck that's very well balanced and fairly redundant, and then you splice in additional, often fairly powered cards for variety. And so you still have this reasonably balanced deck, but you also have a slice of this larger deck built into it that has the excitement of something new. I think that's really clever. Or Agricola does it even more explicitly, where they just offer a bunch of expansion decks that are all independently balanced from one another. And then you have the kind of stationary major improvements that are consistent throughout the game.
Yeah, Maracaibo is a great example of the game can do what it likes with the decks because it's doing other things as well. It's got the rondel places you visit, it's got the exploration tracks, it's got the area control fights over the different nations, right? The randomness, and this one, to me, that while it does stage in those other cards, it does feel like a fairly random pull in Maracaibo. Again, this one is not tight like Lorenzo El Magnifico. It's a little looser, but again, because you're doing other things, I feel like you have more leeway with what you do in those things. Also, there's a ton of card churn in Maracaibo,
Yeah.
so you really can go through and get something that works for you in Maracaibo. And card churn is another thing that really, you pointed out, really alleviates that randomness.
Yeah. You know, something interesting. What is up with all of these big deck games having goals tied to very specific tags on a card? It's like it makes the game about either generating churn to search for a card or enacting churn more efficiently. And it's basically like contract fulfillment, but with extra steps, right? Think about Earth and its goals and objectives, or, you know, specifically like Terraforming Mars has literal tags on the cards that are associated with goals or associated with, you know, personal objectives on other cards. It's all about these like searching through the card deck and use this randomness to your advantage in order to seek out the best card or any card that just fits this objective and then play that, right? Why is that so popular?
I don't get it. It's the thing I like least about big decks, and I mentioned it in Earth, and I completely agree with you. It's like, imagine you were doing contract fulfillment in a worker placement game, and you had a contract that required a lot of gold to fulfill it, but the game said, oh, by the way, gold might not come out in this game, or it might come out, a ton of it might come out, and the person with all the gold contracts is going to win, or none of it might come out, and the person with the gold contracts is in big trouble.
Right.
I don't get it.
You know, it's fine. It's fine if it's on 40% of cards, but if it's on like 10 or 12%, you know what? Forget it, you know? Again,
you're making the point for me about Earth's the end game goals focusing withdrawing a random card pool.
Well, the nice thing about Earth is generally it has a lot of deck churn, like, and it's fine if these games have a lot of inherent deck churn.
It does. But still,
I don't think it's the best mechanism. I don't think it's the most creative. If there's good deck churn, then at least there's a tension between playing the card that satisfies your goal and playing the card that better synchronizes with your strategy, because you might think to yourself, well, I'll get another version of that tag later on, so it's fine. Or, you know, the third option of diving into the deck to find a card that satisfies the goal and best syncs with your strategy, right? But then it's really rough if there's not a lot of inherent deck churn and you have to build that into your engine, or the deck is just way too big in relation to the number of cards with a given tag, which we're talking about, in which case it makes finding the right card a strategy inherently alone. And then there's a certain desperation to it that I find really dissatisfying, where the card type is rare enough that you more or less have to play it. And then it's no longer really a choice. It's no longer really attention. It's just a demand.
Yeah, to me, we're kind of getting off of big decks. It's okay. We're getting off of big decks and into endgame goals. But if you're going to make endgame goals that really matter, I think you need to give player agency in being able to fulfill those goals and not just make them really random or happen them just things that happen to occur to you or happen not to.
Right. And so many, I mean, Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition, Wingspan, Earth, they all have these very specific goals that you have to achieve on these objective cards tied to big decks.
And usually not a ton of choice about those goals too.
Right.
You know?
Right. At least with Race for the Galaxy, you can build something, a different sort of strategy. At least with Ark Nova, you have mitigation factors that allows you to build a different sort of strategy that's not inherent to it. Those games are just that, just
I mean,
satisfying those objectives a lot of the time.
we've talked about end of round objectives as opposed to end game goals. And, I talked about like Terra Mystica and Gaia Project, and say what you want about those games, but you never feel like, oh, I better show up with the right cards to be able to fulfill that goal. No, if you get one coin per thing that you go up the brown track, you can do things to go up the brown track. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
may have to sacrifice other things, but you can make those things happen. There's no hoping to get a card.
Right. So, Tony, anything else to say about big decks?
I think we're going to keep seeing their popularity. I think people know what works and what sells. And, when people look and say, hey, look what Ares Expedition did, and then Ark Nova did, and now look what Earth's doing. Earth, while I enjoy the game more than even those others, it clearly was taking from and imitating things from those other games. There's just no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them for it, because iteration makes great games, right? But
Right.
we're going to see more of this. We're going to see a lot more. I mean, success breeds imitation, and it's going to happen more.
And I think to Earth's credit, they do a good job as far as a churn. They do a good job as far as a representation on each card. Like some of those cards, those goals have like 30 or 40% of cards, right? So yeah, you have to find the right card, but it's probably 1 in 3 cards that you're going to draw, right? So that's not too bad.
And people have made the complaint that I've made, so I think there will be some innovative ways to try to cut down on the combination of randomness and game length, but we'll see.
So big decks, when a trillion just isn't cutting it.
Yeah.
Well, that's about going to do it for TwoWoodForAWheat. Thanks for listening. You can check us out on our Discord in the show notes. You can read more of Tony's blog. He has these weekly thoughts. He's at Max Longstreet, The Secrets of Great Games on Board Game Geek. Also, write us an email if you've got any questions. We're at TwoWoodForAWheat@gmail.com. 2 weeks from now, I think we're going to check out either Revive or Sabika, follow up to the wonderful Bitoku by Erman Milan, and we'll see where we go from there.
Chunky Euro goodness.
Thanks, folks. Stay frosty. TwoWoodForAWheat is recorded across the airwaves in Bear Creek, Pennsylvania, and Chicago, Illinois. We're produced by Tony Faber and edited by Patrick Flannery. Follow us on Instagram at TWFAW and find more episodes and blog posts at TwoWoodForAWheat.com.
William is just every morning at 8 o'clock, he just comes running over to be put on the bed to be scratched. And then when you scratch him, he makes those snorting noises. It's very adorable.
I like the snorting noises from a dog, not so much from a Tony.
And we're also going to be taking a look at other games with big, giant decks of cards.
That joke won't come back to haunt us.
I didn't say anything. I just said big decks.
That's right.
Anyway.
We imply nothing.
We imply nothing at all.